Election night can be stressful. Winning or losing, there may be points of uncertainty that crop up that might make the night very unpleasant, even if your side is doing well enough or even romping towards a win. But it need not be all that bad of an evening, independent of who's winning or losing. The key thing is to having a minimally stressful election night is to be well informed and to set appropriate expectations. What more, how election night unfolds need not complicate your own stress simply because your TV network of choice fails to make known some important details. It might also be smart to turn off the news for a while and get yourself distracted for a time. So I figured I'd help you build your election night strategy for if you are watching TV or news sites or whatever, by stepping you through some of the process which will be on full display, but perhaps not well explained, at least on election night, so that you can find your way through the evening and possible days after responsibly. In other words, today's strategy is all about you and how are you going to survive election night. "2020 is a presidential election year, and so naturally the presidency is up for election, but so is a number of Senate seats, specifically 35 Senate seats, as well as the entire House of Representatives. In many states, there is also local races for state house, governor, or other offices, as well as local, county, city, and school district elections, all dependent on your location. Some places also have propositions and bond issues to vote on, various local rule changes in law that are brought up for the citizenry to vote on. So I recommend, before voting yourself, and you should vote, to check your ballot online to see what races and questions are up, and have a plan of who and what you'll be voting for before filling out your full ballot. But the big three are, of course, the presidency, the Senate, and the House, as those will determine the balance of power for national control going forward for the next few years. 435 House races, 35 Senate races, and 51 contests for the presidency. Some of you may be confused now by me saying 51 contests for the presidency, given there's only one president at a time. The West will recognize I'm referencing the Electoral College. The most direct way to become president is to win the majority of electoral votes. Electoral votes are distributed among the states such that they get one per House district and one per senator. All states have 2 senators and at least 1 House district, so the minimum number for any state is 3, and the most populous state, California, has 55. Do note that I'm all for ending Electoral College, but it's the system we're stuck with, at least for this election, so best to know about it and how it works, and how it will look like on election night. In short, each state has a contest for who gets those electoral votes of the state. The vote leader for the election in each state generally gets electoral votes, winner take all. 2 states, Maine and Nebraska, have winner take all for the electors representing the Senate, but split up the rest by House district. In previous elections, this has led to Trump to win 1 elector in Maine and Obama to win 1 elector in Nebraska, while otherwise both of them losing those respective states. So in total, that's a lot of races. But it will be all over at some hour, right? Well, maybe? Election night in America is operated on a state-by-state basis. Each state determines a great deal of the voting rules and regulations, as well as when they close their polls. Do remember, if you're in line when the polls close, you still get to vote. When the polls close, the state will begin reporting vote counts. States close at various times throughout the evening. Some states adjust their closing time depending on how heavy the turnout is, such as New Hampshire, and some states don't close it all at once because their law specifies a certain hour of the day, but not which time zone. As such, some states, such as Kentucky and Indiana, the first 2 states to start closing, don't halt their voting all at the same time throughout the state. So this might frustrate some as they see a state leaning heavily towards one candidate, but the TV networks are refusing to call the winner until the entire state is done voting. They don't want to discourage people from voting after all, and if you know the winner of your home state, that might discourage you from even bothering. Do note, I encourage, once again, everyone to vote, even if you're in so-called safe states or districts. Having your voice heard is essential to the functioning of democracy. So even if later I talk about some states likely going one way or the other, if you live in one of those states, please don't take anything for granted. Get your ballot in and vote as soon as you can. So back to the schedule. What does it look like exactly? All this information is tentative, but things are likely to shake out like so. All times are in Eastern, so please adjust for your own time zone accordingly. At 6 p.m. Eastern, Indiana and Kentucky will close. If any network or source calls either of these states at closing, they're probably not a legit news source, so go find a better one if you're going to keep watching, or take a break. Both of those states do, however, finish voting at 7 p.m. as the polls close in the Central Time Zone, along with Georgia, South Carolina, Virginia, and Vermont. Eastern Florida also finishes, but again, don't expect it to be called at this hour, as there are still plenty of people in Western Florida still voting. 3 more states at 7:30, North Carolina, Ohio, and West Virginia, will also close. If any states are called by this point in the evening, I would say the most likely options are Kentucky, West Virginia, and Vermont. If others are called, that's a relatively good sign for the winning candidate there, but far from a decisive tell. So be patient and remember, there's 51 contests to determine the presidency, plus a lot of Senate House races to figure out. And some will be razor thin, even if the state votes heavily for one candidate for president or another. So watch out for surprises. 8 p.m. is where things start to pick up. Florida finishes voting, Michigan, Texas, and South Dakota start to finish, New Hampshire maybe finishes, as I said, they can be a little weird, and delay things. Most of the Northeast and a chunk of the South finishes. This will be the hour when a lot of the so-called safe states will have declared winners. Depending on how things are playing out, expect either a close race or a lead for either one of the candidates. But do not assume victory for anyone just yet, as there's still a lot more to go. And remember, the magic number is 270 electoral votes. Another state comes up at 8:30, Arkansas. And only Arkansas closes its polls. And yeah, that's it. But at 9, a bunch of other states close. New York finishes up the Northeast, Louisiana and Texas finish up the South, but most of the states that close at this hour are in the Midwest and West. 9 is perhaps the first time we'll be able to get a good sense of how things are shaping out. If Trump is about even for electors up over Biden at this point, but neither of them are over 150 electoral votes, the race is still very much open. But if either one of them has a significant lead and has over 150 electoral votes, that suggests they're having a good night and are favored to win. Remember, once again, 270 is the majority needed to win the Electoral College. And by this point, a number of the swing states should be called, but not all, and perhaps none of them. The 10 p.m. hour is not too interesting, but has a few more states closing, parts of Idaho and Oregon, Iowa, Montana, Nevada, and Utah. This just leaves the Pacific time zone and the West to finish voting. Unless margins are razor thin, expect a couple more swing states to be called by this point, and more clarity about the top line can be had. If at this stage of things, Trump is over 230 electoral votes and Biden is below 150, the president is perhaps favored to win, barring being behind the remaining swing states by large margins. If, on the other hand, Biden is over 200 electoral votes at 10 o'clock, he is very much favored to win the presidency. And unless there's a blowout, we will reach the 11 p.m. hour and we'll have the first reasonable time that a presidential race can be called, as that will happen at the close of California, Oregon, Washington, and Hawaii, as well as the remainder of Idaho. This will leave only Alaska unfinished with their voting. Most of the states that close at this hour vote heavily by mail, so they might be slow at counting, but several of them might get quick calls for the statewide contests anyway. So at 11, we might have a situation where one candidate is already over the top, or we might have both still struggling to pass 200 electoral votes, or we might even have most of the swing states already called, and it's all down to Alaska. But Alaska won't be called until at least 1 a.m., so maybe just go to bed in that case. But there are a lot of different ways various states could fall. What does it mean if Texas is still close to call at midnight? What does it mean if Biden won Georgia but Trump won Florida? What does it mean that some states might be close enough to trigger an automated recount? Well, I think any of these might mean it's time to go to bed. To put aside the stress of the election for the moment until someone knows what's actually going on. And who knows, maybe you'll wake up in the morning to some good news. Or maybe some not so good news. Or some confusing news? But really, if things aren't clear by midnight, yeah, best just to hit the hay. Which, to a degree, is maybe the best advice I can give you. We've all been perpetually stressed for so long now that having constant worry at a critical moment when most of what's going on is outside of our control is maybe not that healthy. Still, it would be nice to be able to celebrate a win, ideally leading in time to a restoration and expansion of democracy in America. And if you can celebrate election night, go ahead. But do remember, it technically ain't over till there's an actual change of power. Still, if you can get a moment of joy, by all means, enjoy it. Let's say that the election is decided, and there is a clear winner. Then in December, the electors will meet and cast their votes. In early January, they'll be counted by Congress, and hopefully a new president will come into power on the 20th. This is what I'm hoping for. I mean, it should be pretty obvious where I stand, that not only do I oppose the current president, his policies, and political party in general, but see all of them as a threat to democracy itself. And as I'm generally pro-democracy, kind of means I hope he and the rest of the Republican Party go down in flames on election night, lose control of the Senate too, and are swept out of power in even the most conservative-leaning corners of the nation, because people are kind of tired of their shit. But is it really a good idea to have a pessimistic view of things? To assume Trump will only leave office if forced to by gunpoint or by death, potentially years or even decades from now? Probably not. That's probably not helpful. I could go into the various institutional challenges such an attempt to ignore an election would bring, but putting those aside, an important part of rebuilding our democracy is, and has always been, to have trust, but to verify. To keep an eye out for things that are going as they shouldn't, but otherwise to let the machinery of democracy operate when it is operating fairly to express the will of the people. So I won't say take your eye off the ball, but if Biden does win in November, then it is a-okay to take a deep breath and relax for a bit. But with all politics, a breather is usually all we can get. There is still plenty to be done, and plenty of pushing Biden with regards to making sure he doesn't simply return to, quote, normalcy, but that there's an active cleanup of the damage that has been done over the last 4 years, and a bit of a reckoning to come with. The federal court system has been politicized so much that it lacks legitimacy. People are dying in the street due to police street executions in COVID. Parents and their children have still been separated at the border, and the children put into the care of people who are at best unable to do so properly, and at worst, prey upon them. There's still money in politics, way too much money, a lot of money in politics, and we should probably change that. And don't forget the multiple scandals that have been pushed under the rug the last few years because prosecutors just kind of refuse to touch the president on principle, I guess. So there's a ton of problems that need a lot of tackling here. And there might be a few more that crop up between now and Election Day and Inauguration Day. So in the long run, we can only relax so much. But having a small break, a brief window of celebration, that is a-okay. And I hope we get that chance. So please, if you haven't yet, please vote Biden. Because if we don't get that chance, well, that means 4 more years of all of this awfulness, or worse, ambiguity over the election results that result in being stolen by a heavily pro-Trump Supreme Court. You know, they did just kind of push out through a justice last minute there. Yeah. I don't want to give away too much of my own plans if that were to happen, but let's just say I have no intentions of living in a fascist state, and I ain't leaving the country. Well, that got kind of dark. Let's do one more thing to finish this video. On election nights previous, I've streamed. Not sure if I'll do much of the same this year, in part because my anxiety makes streaming something live way too much for me on even a good day at this point, but also I might be playing D&D in the middle of things there, so, you know. If I am, well, it will be a great opportunity to keep my brain distracted from the nitty-gritty of elections, states, and returns. And some of you may have noticed how much I can go into the nitty-gritty and kind of get lost for days in the details. So maybe the best strategy for election night is to not keep your eye glued to the TV or Twitter or anything else or your news site of choice, but to find something to do, safely and ideally online if you don't live with anyone, that is both fun and can do with others. Because sometimes it is best to remind ourselves that we're not alone in the world, that there are good people around who like us and trust us. Yes, even you got some folks like that. You might not see them very often or even think about them yourself, but the funny thing is about the best people, they tend to not be all that flashy or prone to drawing attention to themselves, because someone with a lot of kindness doesn't want to make it all about themselves, but about the joy we can have together. And I hope you can figure out who such a person is and how to spend the evening with them if you can. And if that fails, there's plenty of corners of the internet where there's wonderful people who will be likewise looking for a distraction for a few hours, to take their minds off the world for a brief moment so they can be prepared to either shout for joy over a victory or to cry together over a loss. In either case, please, be there for them too if you can. But before you get all of that sorted, make sure, once again, that you vote. Like, seriously, it's important, and literally the easiest thing to do in politics. And please, please vote for Biden. He wasn't my first choice in the primaries, that should be obvious, but to a certain degree, that doesn't matter, especially as defeating authoritarianism does more than most things in terms of getting my support. And I think us having a win over authoritarianism and the corrosive forces of the Republican Party would be some great self-care right about now. There are a lot of ways election night could go, but it doesn't need to be stressful. Being aware of the nuances of how election night flows helps, as does having people around, in real space or online, you can interact with to keep yourself sorted and grounded. But I also can't provide you the complete roadmap for how to survive on election night. You kind of need to understand your own needs when it comes to high-pressure political moments and how to best to manage them. And if you're uncertain about things, be it technical details or about the meaning of a state being called at poll close versus 15 minutes later, or how to pull together a game night, feel free to ask folks. Ideally those that know you, but if not, I suppose I can help. But I don't got all the answers. Many of the answers perhaps, but especially not when it comes to taking care of yourself. That really does come for you. Good luck, and may we finally reverse the slide towards fascism and begin a new era of actual democracy in America. Good luck, everyone.